Namaste. We are joined this morning with Shri Andre Was. And so, just a little something about him. Shortly after achieving financial freedom by his early 20s, an unsettling inquiry grew pertaining to the impermanence of security, friendship, world exploration, and self help. How will more make more difference, and to whom? Nature of questions such as these eventually turned to the subject of I. And one day, an urge compelled him to visit Arunachala to pay respect to Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi. Attracted to a 25-day program nearby on Bhagavad Gita by James Swartz, and unceasingly persisting with the prescribed inquiry for months later, the first dawn of self-knowledge ensued. Clarity was further elucidated through participation in Chinmaya International Foundation in Kerala, and finally, after meeting Nima Majumdar, who was also a student of Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji of Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. Her style meticulously expounded the vision of reality and the meaning of non-duality Advaita. The definition of Guru came alive upon meeting her as well. His sole purpose in life now is to protect and disseminate the Sampradaya of Advaita Vedanta as highlighted by Adi Shankaracharya. So in this session, Andre is going to walk us through some of his explorations and his entry and insights gathered in Advaita Vedanta as a Westerner. So without further ado, I hand it over to Andre. Namaste.
Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Bande Guru Paramparam. Om. Pranam. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Advaita Academy sincerely for allowing me to contribute something that I would like to share. And also that I understand that it takes a lot of effort to create something to run in such a smooth manner. So I'd like to acknowledge Advaita Academy for putting this Oneness Festival together. Thank you. And for me, the topic was given to speak about the relevance of Shankaracharya in the Western world or the Western seeker. Now, to firstly define this Western seeker, when I say Western seeker, it specifically will mean someone that is not in the heart of the place wherein this knowledge is mostly contained or found, which is in India. So this doesn't necessarily mean a Caucasian. It can mean even an Indian who lives outside India. But it generally means the one who is not exposed to this knowledge on a daily basis and is still seeking for the truth sincerely. And since Adi Shankara is closely or strongly associated to Advaita Vedanta, I thought to first define the word Vedanta for the listeners so that we're on the same page. And then we can link this definition of Vedanta and Adi Shankara to the relevance to a Western seeker. So firstly, let's take the word Anta. So if we divide the word Vedanta into two, let's just focus on the word Anta. And we'll ask, what does this word mean, Anta? And it has two definitions. The first definition is inside. For example, we have the word Antahkarana, so the inner instrument. So in other words, inside what? Inside the four Vedas. Now the question is, where specifically inside? It doesn't necessarily mean at the end, because inside can mean in the middle or somewhere between the end or the middle or even towards the beginning. And this knowledge, this inside is also called Upanishads. And the second section is, the second definition of the word Anta is knowledge or vision. In other words, certainty of conclusion. So what does this mean? It means owning to the effort of the sadhaka, owning to their atma vichara, to their self-persistent inquiry, they have reached a conclusion which is without doubts. Therefore, the knowledge gained has led through their self-inquiry to a certainty of conclusion. For example, when we get into a car, we don't doubt our driving experience to go from where we are to the grocery store, because we are certain that what we know is firmly established, it is firmly ascertained. So therefore, the first definition is inside, which is called Upanishads, and the second is knowledge or vision, which has brought a certainty of conclusion. Conclusion about what? Conclusion about the reality. Therefore, the word Anta means the culminating vision of the four Vedas. That means the highest vision, the vision that provides the highest knowledge, the foundation knowledge of all other relative knowledges. And the word Veda, so if we now look at the Anta is over, so we look at the word Veda, this comes from the root vid. And it actually has two definitions. The first one is to know. And the second is to attain. So in other words, the word Veda means the body of knowledge by which one attains. So the question is, attains what? The body of knowledge, in other words, Anta, the final conclusion of the Vedas by which one's understanding is clear, by which one is firmly rooted in reality. Why is this the case? Because there is certainty of conclusion. So if we put these two words together, we can say that Vedanta is the culmination, Anta, of the body of knowledge, Veda, which is most exalted, and which brings the seeker to stop seeking. In other words, they come to a point where they're no longer asking, what more is there? They're brought to a point whereby the knowledge, owing to their certainty of conclusion, has brought clarity to their vision of reality, to their vision of thoughts, to their vision of the world, to their vision of the total. And as we said, this knowledge is also called Upanishads. So for example, in the Mundaka Upanishad, the first section, verse 3, Shishya Shaunaka approaches the teacher, Acharya Angiras, in a proper manner. And this proper manner means with the right humility, with the right established strong discrimination. And the Shishya says to the Acharya, Kasmin nu Bhagavaha Vijnate Sarvam idam Vijnatam Bhavati. In other words, O revered sir, what is that knowledge, knowing which everything becomes known? In other words, what is that knowledge? Once known, the answers to all questions are also known. And we're not speaking about relative knowledge. So, for example, the Shishya is not now going to understand how to speak Spanish and how to speak Tamil and Bengali and know the periodic table of elements. We're talking about the fundamental knowledge. For example, if we have furniture made out of wood, then there are different forms they're different names, they're different purposes, they're different functions they all serve. However, the fundamental knowledge of all of these forms and names is the one wood. So what is that one knowledge, knowing which the entire world of objects, of thoughts, becomes known at once? Therefore, the Shishya's knowledge comes to an end. Why? Because the teacher, the knowledge of what reality is not, what reality is and what reality is not, so these false conclusions come to an end. His knowledge of what the reality is, that comes to an end. Why? Because that knowledge was incorrect. In other words, the pramana by the acharya has corrected his false knowledge. Thus, it comes to an end. How does it come to an end? It comes to an end through the process of shravanam, mananam, and nididhyasanam. And this is actually a relevant point, number one, for a Western seeker, because it means that when the shishya approaches the acharya with the right humility, with the right attitude, wanting to remove the knowledge which is incorrect, then they get told a proper step-by-step method how to remove this ignorance through the famous stages of Shravana, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam. And we're not going to speak about them unless it's a question, then I'll answer. But the beauty is going through this process, the Shishya's knowledge comes to an end. And why does it come to an end? Again, because the Shishya was mature enough, Shishya means student, mature enough to not take on beginningless ignorance by themselves. In other words, they were mature enough to understand, even though my knowledge seems true, it may not be true. Therefore, I want to investigate. I want to ask for help. So this takes a lot of humility to put one's false knowledge to an end. And what does the acharya do from there on? It helps, or she helps, it doesn't matter what gender it is, the shishya to remove the false conclusions and thus align their vision with reality as it is. And this is where Shankara becomes relevant to a Western seeker, because Shankara presents his bhashya, his texts. All of his texts are presented in a very logical and structured manner. So it has a consecutive flow, A, B, C, D, etc. And this is very important for a Western mind, because a Western mind often is looking for something that has structure, that has a certain sequence to it. So without the sequence, without the structure, what happens? For example, the seeker will end up pursuing excessively antahkarana shuddhi, or tapas. In other words, they keep on purifying over and over again. Every single day they're purifying. What are you doing tomorrow? I'm purifying. What about next week? I'm going to a 10-day meditation retreat to purify. What about next? I'm doing pranayama purification. So they end up doing excessive purification, but not knowing what is the purpose of this purification and where is it supposed to lead to. Another example, a common mistake, is the sadhaka, owning to their false knowledge, will see meditation as the ultimate end, instead of seeing it as but a means. So this is what I said earlier. The sadhaka's knowledge, believing it to be true, thus bases his or her actions on this false knowledge. And thus it leads to continued seeking. So this is why Shankara's works are crucial in today's times, because it lets us know exactly where am I and where am I supposed to be going? What's next? Another common example is the bhakta will prescribe or subscribe to bhakti, so they will be extremely devoted, but their lack of involvement in jnanam, in knowledge, and antahkarana shuddhi will compromise their success, because they're devoting, but not knowing why am I devoting, to who am I devoting to, and what is the purpose of devotion. So all of these examples show us how this false knowledge that a shishya who does not put to an end causes the shishya's actions to be consistent with what is already the case. And what's already the case? One is ignorant. One is continuing to seek. Thus, if this knowledge is put to an end, one will continue to seek in the same manner, hopping to a different object, to hop into a different sadhana. Therefore, Shankara's bhashya, commentaries, and many texts that he puts forth, assuming they're taught under the guidance of an acharya, otherwise the shishya will interpret it through the eyes of ignorance, through the eyes of misconception, then the shishya will indeed enjoy seeing the well outlined function, the how-to within Adi Shankara's texts, so that the shishya knows what should be done next and where am I right now. What is the purpose of karma yoga? What's the purpose of bhakti? What's the purpose of jnanam? Otherwise, again, what will happen is they will prescribe to, let's say, another lineage of kriya yoga, and it will seem like the ultimate end. So then a few years will go into this, and then eventually when it's no longer working, which is usually the case, then they will likely jump into a different sadhana. So what Adi Shankara does, his works, his clarity, it helps the Western seekers see where is this, what's the purpose of this from the beginning. Thus, they cannot veer off into their own idea. They cannot make out of the sadhana what they would have it be, but rather go with the trajectory as the sadhana has initially prescribed. So this is one of the benefits of Shankara's works. And this is why we chant at the beginning, Sada Shiva Samarambham. In other words, from the beginningless beginning, from the first guru, from whence all of this knowledge comes. Shankaracharya Madhyamam. Down to the middle, to the one, Adi Shankara, who has revived the essence, the importance of this knowledge. Asmadacharya Paryantam, down to the one whom I, as a shishya, have asked, O revered teacher, what is that knowledge? Knowing which everything becomes known. Asmadacharya Paryantam, Vande Guru Paramparam. In other words, I prostrate to that tradition. I prostrate to that tradition, which being with, leads me to the light. So to summarize what Vedanta is, we're still on the topic of Vedanta, and then we'll move on. Vedanta is not a set of values, even though it does prescribe certain values, which if followed, they lead to harmony with the world. They lead to harmony with the environment. Vedanta is not a particular mode of living, even though it does show us how does a Jivan Muktaha, how does a Jnani live? What is their life like? For example, in the Gita, Arjuna asks Krishna, how does a wise person talk? How do they conduct themselves? And this is a very valid question, because sometimes a seeker needs some kind of gauge, some kind of guidance. What is this? What is a wise person like to begin with? Otherwise, without any vision of a wise person, then one really doesn't know how they're supposed to carry themselves. So at least they have some kind of reference point. And also Vedanta is not intellectualizing reality of the real and the unreal, even though a certain level of viveka, of clarity of the intellect and mind, is required to apply Atma Vichara, self-inquiry. So what is Vedanta? Vedanta is a direct method or a direct embodied vision, aligned with reality as it is. In other words, it is objectivity. What does this mean? It means the sadhaka sees reality as it is, without having the need to project personal subjective notions, personal prejudices, personal biases onto that which is inherently not. So in other words, the vision of clarity ensues, and the vision of false unknowing projection owing to one's knowledge, which is false, that ends. So now I would like to bring this a little bit more specific and ask the question, how specifically does Vedanta, or how is it relevant in our everyday life, which consists of many duties? So now we can start to integrate this definition of Vedanta into family, into work, into career, and ask the question, how is it relevant today? So first of all, we'll ask, what is life? Because the question is, how is Vedanta relevant in life? So we have to ask, what is our definition of life? So life means sentiency. And what does sentiency lead to? It leads to activity. In other words, sentience, to live, is to be sentient, thus to be active. One cannot be, if one's sentient, they're automatically active. So that is interconnected. Therefore, life can be defined as series of actions. One action followed by another action. And these actions cannot be avoided by anyone at any time and any place. For example, in the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 5, in the first line, it said, no one can ever remain, even for a moment, without performing actions. And in the second line, says, because everyone is made to act helplessly by the qualities born of Prakriti. Therefore, all sentient beings are in a continued, we can say, in a continued state of movement, if not physically, then mentally. So it doesn't matter if we're not physically moving, we're still actively participating in memories and thoughts about the world. So action is inevitable. And why is action inevitable? Because there is sentience. And why is there sentience? Because there is life. So we can now ask, what is the root cause of all movement? Because we have now said sentiency equals activity, and activity equals movement. So what causes movement, whether it is physical or mental? And the answer is desire. What kind of desire? We go back to Bhagavad Gita 3.5, the second line. Desire born of qualities of Prakriti, so of the three gunas. For example, we wake up or we're at home and we're thinking about going to work. While at work, we're thinking about going home. When at home, we want to go and enjoy a holiday. When on holiday, we become homesick. So in every sequence, in every step of the way, there is a desire, 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 desire born out of movement. So there's a movement, a need to move to the next step. So this means in and through every action born of desire, there is a desire to get something, which one doesn't seem to have right now. So we can now ask, what is this something which invokes an unceasing desire, which invokes persistent desire? The answer is seeking happiness. So again, what is it that causes unceasing desire? The fundamental is seeking happiness. For example, why does one meditate? Do they meditate to suffer later on? No, they meditate to be happy, to feel relieved, to feel better about themselves. Why does one perform different yoga sadhana? Is it to feel lesser? Is it to feel smaller? No, it is to feel more expansive, more open about themselves. So whatever sadhana a person does, or even if it's a sport, even if it's some career or some sport, or even if it's socializing, whatever it is, we all do something, whatever it is, to be happier. So even a mosquito, which has a rushed dinner on your arm on a nice evening, it does that. Why? He or she, depends if it's a male or female, to feel happier about itself. It doesn't suck blood to be miserable afterwards. So even at the level of insects, if you put a little hand and obstruct an ant's path, it wants to go away. In other words, this seeks freedom for itself, and freedom and happiness, they're interconnected. Therefore, we can say that actions differ, that means they're different, but the one commonality is I do actions to be happy. That's the commonality in every single situation, despite the differences in various forms of attempts to gain happiness. And also, what makes a person happy today, it doesn't make them happy tomorrow or with the same intensity. Or what makes one person happy doesn't make another person happy. So there's a constant change. So we can say that the means to happiness is in constant flux. But the fact of I want to be happy, I am seeking happiness, that remains unchanged in and through all actions. For example, the ancient man, let's say maybe 10,000 years ago, 20,000, let's say caveman, what do they do to survive? Things that are certainly different than today. For example, they made weapons out of bone, out of wood, out of rock. Why? To protect themselves, to be happy. The man or the woman were inside a cave. Why? To feel safe, to have a sense of security, to be happy. Whereas today's man has no connection to any of those activities. What does a today's man do? Dresses in a particular manner, which is representative of, at least in their mind, a success or some kind of status in a society, a possession of a particular mental or physical nature. It could be a career possession. It could be fame, whether it's community fame, national fame. So the ancient ways and the modern ways, they have all changed. And they're all concepts in time. Because as time goes on, so do the methods also change. But the basic desire to attain happiness is the same in and through. So in other words, I want to gain happiness or attain it, sukha prapti, and I want to avoid unhappiness, dukkham nivrti. That remains one constant throughout all of these ancient and modern ways. Another example is we have, in the ancient times, we used fingers to eat. But in the modern times, we use knife and fork. So the fundamental reality of food to live, this remains unchanged. And the fundamental reality of eating only through the mouth also remains unchanged. So in that same way, Vedanta knowledge remains timeless. Thus, it addresses the fundamental problem, which is consistent in and through all ages. And what is this problem? The problem is giving absolute reality to this body-mind appearance and mistaking it as the unchanging, immortal self. Thus, doing all actions to try to sustain this body. So therefore, the fundamental problem is also mentioned in the Gita, where Arjuna basically says to Krishna, how do I resolve this conflict with the environment, with the world? And what the second question, basically he says, and how do I gain permanent, everlasting happiness? Of course, we're not talking about the body happiness, but the freedom of knowledge, self-knowledge. And this is why the Vedic knowledge and Dharma in India is called Sanatana Dharma, because it doesn't deal with these various methods that change through the course of time, but it deals with the fundamental underlining principle onto which various methods change, but the fundamental reality does not change. Thus, Sanatana Dharma is that fundamental foundation that is the same back 5,000 years ago and the same today. So in conclusion, we can ask, how is Vedanta Shankara relevant in the quest for happiness in modern life? And then we can say, because because the quest for happiness, it depends on timeless, time-tested, systematic methodology, which is outlined in Shankara's works like Atma Bodha, Tattva Bodha, Viveka Chudamani, Drishya Viveka, etc. So all of these methods are already outlined in a beautiful order. And what is the risk if the student decides to undertake this beginningless problem by themselves? I'll just give you two. One of them is the student discards Adi Shankara's evergreen, ever fresh, ever efficacious works, which are meant to solve this beginningless problem of superimposing the false body onto the Atma. And also not realizing that all non-dual teachings are actually most elaborately and most accurately defined in Shankara's contributions. So in other words, why go elsewhere when one can go to the source of the teaching, thus gain the greatest knowledge right there and then? And the second is the discrimination between the real and the unreal. This will remain likely partial. So what this means is the person will mistake many short-term methods of happiness as absolutes. So they will say, well, this is how to gain happiness. but that will also expire in a certain amount of months or years, and then they will chase for something different. So this ironically just reinforces samsara. Whereas they could rather go to the method which is supposed to solve the problem of skipping from one solution to the next. So in fact, there's a story of an old lady, just to demonstrate the problem of seeking in the wrong place, who was looking for her needle in the garden, and it was actually inside her hut. So she called all her neighbors and they were all looking in the garden for the needle, but all of her efforts and her friends' efforts failed. Why? Because they were looking in the wrong place. So this means no matter how modern their methods are, how efficient their methods are, some of them brought flashlights, floodlights, magnetic sensors. Some of them even brought a NASA supercomputer to calculate the falling trajectory of the needle, thus to ascertain its final rolling place inside the hut. All of these methods, no matter how modern or ancient, failed. Why? Because the initial conclusion is false. And what is that conclusion? That the needle is in the garden, not the hut. So the NASA computer was applied to the garden. So every single method failed. So in that same way, when the seeker is seeking for immortality, then if they look in the wrong place, then all of their efforts will fail no matter what they try. Therefore, to seek immortality, to seek this vision, one's attitude and vision towards life has to change as prescribed by these timeless scriptures, which are further elucidated through Shankara's works. So that is one of the great benefits that a Western seeker gains by being involved in the sampradaya, by entering a proven sampradaya by this tradition, thus relying on methods that work. And I also want to close with the debate between Shankara and Mandana Mishra, who became one of his disciples, Sureshwara. And Mandana Mishra was a Purva Mimamsa, one of the head of Purva Mimamsika schools. And he said that the purpose of Veda is to prompt man into action, thus to gain enough punya karma so that the man or woman can enjoy heavenly realms for some time later. And at the end of that punya karma, the man comes back to earth and then he has to go through another round. Whereas Adi Shankara said of Advaita Vedanta or Uttara Mimamsa, he said the Veda has two sections. The first is Karma Kanda, and it prepares the mind for the second section, which is Jnana Kanda. In other words, Jnana Kanda gives the highest vision of the Vedas. And what is the highest vision of the Vedas? And we'll conclude with this. Shankara said, Brahman is Satchit Ananda. That means the ultimate reality. And it is this Brahman that appears as the world of multiplicity, owning to beginningless ignorance. So for example, the shell, the mother of a pearl on the seashore, if I look at it from a certain distance, it will look like a shiny object. Suppose it's a silver. Why? Because I don't have enough information to ascertain what exactly it could be. Therefore, I project the next closest thing. But no matter what I project, it is never the actual principle. It is always something that I've projected through my own mind. Now, upon closer look, upon coming to that source, upon being closer with the acharya, with the guru, with the sampradaya tradition, what happens? that illusion is dispelled. So in that same way, when ignorance is erased, then the whole world is as though dissolved into the substratum Brahman, which is the same as one's own self. So just like that false projection is dissolved into its substratum, in the same way, this world is as though dissolved into Brahman. I say as though because it doesn't actually dissolve. And then Shankara said that the supreme knowledge is called moksha, if it's well ascertained, if it's firm, which brings the cessation of rebirth. And he also said that, this is the last thing I'll say, Shankara also said to Mandana is that my only objective is to spread the wisdom of Vedanta everywhere as a true gospel for the salvation of man. He said, I have no other interest in anything else. And he also said, abandoning Vedanta is reveling in cult of sacrifices. Therefore, Adi Shankara, we can say, uncovers the true self with clarity for the liberating benefit of those who are struggling in the upward stream of samsara, yet are sincerely yearning for the abidance and the clarity of the self as the self. And thus this concludes our topic on the relevance of Shankaracharya. Thank you. I cannot hear anything.
So thank you very much, Andreji. This was a very fascinating and wonderful talk, and we got to learn a lot more about the perspective of a Western student who's studying Advaita Vedanta and the journey as a traditional seeker. So now we'll just open it up for student or audience questions. And so there's one question which says, it feels more concrete to understand we should have equanimity towards happiness and suffering. To say that we are seeking for permanent highest happiness seems a bit stretched. It sounds like the highest desire one could have. Why should anyone have such a desire or look to seek such a limitless happiness? So the essential question is, why should one seek such a limitless happiness?
Well, if someone even asks that, see, even to ask this question, one now desires an answer to make them happy. So no matter what we're doing, what actions we're doing, no matter how small, it's still to have some kind of peace of mind within myself or with the world. So this is why we're always asking questions so that we can understand what are they actually talking about. So I'm asking for my own sake. But also when I say happiness, I think we should actually define this a little bit. I'm not talking about, first of all, worldly happiness. I'm talking about the happiness that is the knowledge, knowing which everything is clear. So it no longer brings any doubts in my vision towards the world. So for example, why is the world in a certain place of, suppose, mostly adharmic in a certain aspect? Then we no longer have this need to judge because we have this vision, clarity. Well, that's because the person has their own karma to play out. They don't have time to look at the scriptures, so they have no choice but to continue doing what they've already been doing before. So why is someone seeking limitless happiness? That will only depend on if they understand the definition of limitless happiness. Otherwise, they will go back into short-term worldly happiness.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from the audience? So Vishnu Ananda is asking how praising God in ignorance helps us to understand the objective of Veda in true sense, especially Vedanta? Could you clarify the question?
I understand the question, actually.
Okay.
So the scriptures actually offers us 3 stages of progress. And the first stage is called, how many minutes do I have, by the way?
We have another 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, so that's a good question. And I'll just use the Bhagavad Gita. So there's 3 stages to realize the reality. The first one, it says that Ishvara is nimitta, called nimitta karanam. In other words, the intelligent cause. And the intelligent cause, this means Lord is the one which puts this world together. And this stage is crucial because it teaches us dharma. So in other words, there is an intelligent principle because of which this world is. And most religions focus on this stage. Now, the second stage is where Ishvara is no longer just nimitta karanam, but also upadana karanam. In other words, Ishvara is the cause which undergoes changes to produce effects. So in other words, the whole world is modifying itself only to upadana karanam, to this material cause. Now, the person asks themselves, if Lord is a creator, then where did he get his materials from? So the first stage, the person is praising God in ignorance. And eventually, through doing so, they start to ask themselves, well, wait a minute. What about the very world? What about all of these materials in this world? Where did these materials come from? So this is when they go into the second stage, where Ishvara is no longer nimitta karanam, but also nimitta and upadana karanam, the intelligent cause and the material cause. For example, the mason needs cement to create what the mason does, or the carpenter needs wood. So these stages, even if it's praising Lord in ignorance, they still lead us to the next stage, owing to the sharpening of one's intellect through the course of time. And then eventually the stage 3 is when the student recognizes that Ishvara is actually the causeless cause. In other words, the unchanging, attributeless reality, nirguna. So in short, all of these stages are very important and they're absolutely crucial. So it doesn't matter if someone is praising God in ignorance, it is still leading them to stage 2, and stage 2 is going to lead them to stage 3.
Wonderful. We have one more question. It says, we cannot live without memory. One second. Scrolling back. We cannot live without memory. Then what do we need to memorize? Can we resist anything getting memorized, leading to happiness or sorrow? Can we de-memorize what we have already memorized?
Can we rememorize what we have already? Why would you want to rememorize what we have already memorized? Can we define that? I'm not quite clear.
Ramonji, if you could clarify the question further, then we can take that back up again. In the meanwhile, I'll just jump to the next one. Would a jnani know he or she is a jnani having moksha? Or how does one know that one is a knower?
Yeah, so the point of reference for knowledge is the scriptures, because the scriptures define what is a jnani and what is the knowledge that leads to this vision. So a jnani cannot say, I know, because the scripture is the one that says if you really know or not. So the scripture is not only a means to arrive to this vision, but it also a reference point for someone to go back to and see if their vision is aligned with the scriptures. That is how.
There's another question. Dear Andre, it is very impressive and inspiring to see you speak with such clarity and knowledge of Vedanta, and to see your conviction and dedication. Could you please tell us a little bit more about your journey? how you started and how you progressed?
I started as a young, maybe around 17, and as a Westerner, I grew up in a poor family, so money to me was fascinating because I never got any pocket money as a small child. So it was really on my mind by the time I was 17. And maybe like most kids, I thought that success is in financial freedom and having that sense of freedom to move. But the motivation was to just support my family because I was grown up in a family where wife, children are primary. So my whole vision was support my family in the future. So through the years, this kept growing and growing. But then I quickly realized that I'm not really interested in finances because it doesn't bring me any fulfillment. So I changed my logic that there must be something more to this. So then my focus shifted from money into self-help. So I wanted to see how to be happy, how to find, how to contribute to the world. But then even that brought me unhappiness because I realized that that too is short-lived and there's still something within me that is empty. So there was this constant emptiness that was driving me towards discovery of something that was going to put the end to this emptiness. Thus, I thankfully discovered Advaita Vedanta.
So Ram Mohanji clarified his question on the memory. So he says all suffering is due to keeping things in memory, and frequently remembering those things is really the cause of suffering. So either we should not take the memory or we should try to forget them.
No, it's not about, okay, good. It's not, I don't see it as a matter of memory because the memory is going to be there one way or the other. Even a jnani still carries a body with them, still carries a mind with them. So these memory and mind, they're going to still come through. So it's just only a matter of understanding that these thoughts that are, whether we call them thoughts or memories, they actually have little value because they do not belong to the self. So it's really having this clarity between who am I and who am I not. So it's having a different relationship with one's memories, no matter how unpleasant or destructive or unfortunate they are. So one cannot use one's memories in life as a means to put a value onto their life which is unworthy or cannot get out of my suffering. It doesn't matter. The whole point is to understand these memories are always going to remain to the last breath. So you have to simply start looking at these memories in a different way. And how? By reframing. In other words, I can say, okay, well, how else can I look at this? How can I learn from this memory so that I can grow as a person? So it's always about having a different relationship, a different attitude towards what is arising in the moment, so that it doesn't arise again. So one another point is, if the memory keeps re-arising, the reason for that is because in the last time round, I did not resolve it. In other words, I let it simply occur and I resisted it. And there's a common phrase that says, what we resist persists. So every time the memory comes back, if it's unpleasant, it's because I was resisting it the last time round. So what do? What do we do as a person who's having these thoughts? We simply look at this in a different light, a light that makes peace. It brings peace about this memory.
Great. So until there are any further questions, like our audience may send more questions, I can ask you one in the meanwhile. So as you very well know, when Vedanta or yoga or Ayurveda or anything for that matter gets exported to the West, it enters this sort of franchising model. And now you have certifications and it's all about the money, right? It's no longer about the knowledge.
Yeah.
So how are things in Australia? Have you encountered anything similar to the craziness that we have in the US, or are things relatively better?
Australia is very much a copy of USA model. It is highly commercialized, and I think it's unfortunate. So that's why I say my vision is to protect this tradition so it doesn't become commercialized also. But this is the reality, and it's very hard to stop. For example, I cannot imagine charging. I've never charged. I even refuse donations for Vedanta. But I cannot see how can someone take money for something that is free. Yeah, so
Indeed,
it just depends on the person. I also don't judge anyone who does ask, because there is a level of supporting oneself. And also, it's quite ironic that in the West, the way the mind's trained is, if it pays for money, it looks at it as valuable. If it's free, it automatically associated as unworthy. So the way to get people in sometimes is to actually ask for money. So it's counterintuitive.
That makes a lot of sense. So there's a question from Vijayji. The question is, there is a knower, the field, and the interaction between the knower and the field. There is a plurality in the field, even though we can reconcile that the knower is consciousness in our experience. There is plurality in the field where we identify objects in various names and forms. How do we fold this duality in our experience? To say that without consciousness, the object in the field cannot exist in our experience is not quite convincing. Can we not equally have an insight that without a field, we cannot be able to talk about consciousness?
Okay. How do we reconcile? Okay. I'll use the example of a dream. At night time, as we will have very soon, I, the self, in reference to my mind, become both the intelligent and the material cause of the entire dream. So I, in reference to the mind, become the material cause and the intelligent cause of the entire dream. So every material in the dream is made out of whom? Out of me. All of the intelligent principles in the dream is made out of whom? Out of me. So for example, suppose there's a mountain climber now in the dream. Suppose we're dreaming, and there's two mountain climbers, and they are thirsty. And there's a mountain, they're climbing on the mountain. So the mountain climber, the thirst, and the mountain, they are all modifications of my mind. Not of me, but of my mind. So in other words, and what is the truth of the mind? What did I say in the beginning? I, the self, in reference to my mind. So what is the truth of the mind? I, the self. So I, the self, I am awareing the mountain climber's mind. I, the self, am awareing the second mountain climber's mind. I, the self, am awareing the thirst of the mountain climber. I, the self, am awareing the mountain itself. All of these things are not away from myself, but they are not me. I cannot say that the mountain climber is me, because I said at the beginning, I, in reference to my mind, am the material and intelligent cause of the whole creation. So in the same way, how do we reconcile? By understanding that Brahman, in reference to Maya, creates this world of multiplicity, which we then give reality to. So now we're not supposed to reconcile anything. We're supposed to understand that the world that I see is never apart from the one self. Just like imagine the mountain climber going, how am I supposed to reconcile this reality? And the mountain climber says this in the dream. The reality is the mountain climber is never away from the very truth of the entire dream.
There's another question. What do dreams represent or signify?
Okay, the dreams are the Sukshma Sharira identification. So when we start to dream, we will notice that there is a lot of thoughts that are personal to us from our life. So the dream, because there is no gross body, then it's a lot more fluid. So our mind is not restricted by our five senses, our jnana indriya. That's why the dream can be so fluid and it can go in any way. You can bring things together. And all of these things that we bring together are something that we have experienced in the previous days, in this life, or even sometimes the past life. So what do the dreams signify? They signify our deep unconscious mind. And these thoughts also play out in the waking state, but in the dream state, they're a lot more perceptible because they're not restricted by the gross body. So therefore, like Carl Jung, he used dream therapy. So you can use dream therapy, and I've used this for a long time myself, to look at what is inside my mind. So every time you wake up, you have a journal to train your mind to write down. And you write down just write down anything, even if it's one eye. If you saw an eye, just write down eye. And next morning, you'll remember a little bit more. And use this to correct or to look at this dream in the light of something that is informative, something that you can learn from. So you can ask, what is the meaning of this? And what can I learn from this? Okay, so there was a fight between me and my dad. Okay, so I can now do a little puja and forgive my father, or something like that. So dreams are excellent ways for means of transformation.
I think somewhere somebody even mentioned that an uninterpreted dream is like a letter that's unopened. So that's very contextual there.
The
so
mind
there's
opens.
one more, Trupti ji has one more question. What if it feels like knowledge is coming and then going away? How is that feeling reconciled? Or maybe interest is lagging. How does one keep going? How do we use bhakti and jnanam together in the right way?
Okay. Initially, the knowledge will feel like it's going and coming. In fact, this is a common experience. So number one, if this is the case, then it is normal. It's not just happening with one person. It's happening with anyone who is beginning to be in this journey. The reason it comes and goes is because the mind still is contaminated through its past conditioning. So at one moment, it is sattvic, and at another moment, it is rajasic. So when it's sattvic, then the pure light of awareness is shining. And then I go, wow, the knowledge is clear. And then the samskara, owning to the exposure of the environment, comes, and what happens? It triggers a memory. And that memory brings in rajas or tamaguna. And thus, the knowledge goes away. So these samskaras keep on coming and going. And in reference to them coming and going, we have this sense of knowledge is coming and the knowledge is going. So the next question is then, how do we cure these samskaras? And the answer is we can use karma yoga and we can use bhakti. Now, karma yoga is explained in the Gita, chapter 3. And bhakti can also it's a consistent practice, because then you're always offloading all of these samskaras to Ishvara, because they're not yours. You did not create them. You were exposed to them through lifetimes, but I did not choose to be exposed to them. For example, we're born with a certain parent, but nobody chooses what kind of parents we're born with. So suppose someone is born with an abusive parent. I didn't choose that, because who would want to be born in such a family? Because I was born with supposed abusive parents, then I now have to deal with those samskaras which are related to the abusive family. So how do I deal with that? Again, we have to look at it in a different light until it brings peace. So the same message applies. You have to reframe whatever unpleasant thought arises until, if it arises again, you have a different relationship with it. That is how you know that the last time round, you have done a proper perspective. You have performed a right sadhana in regards to that thought. In other words, never leave any thought just flying away, because it will come back guaranteed. As soon as a samskara comes back, or an environment reminds me of that environment, of that memory, it will come back. So use every single moment of unpleasantness to inquire into it and bring peace, to bring happiness in relation to that thought, until no thoughts bother. So it really is hard work, step by step, brick by brick.
Wonderful. And so we have time for just one more question. And the question is, where does the fruit of your dream actions go?
Okay, so the dream is a different order of reality. So for example, suppose I dream and I murder someone. So then if I wake up, do I go to the police station and I say, I murdered someone? What are they going to say? They're going to say, okay, where's the body? And I say, what's in my dream? They're going to say, well, sorry, you need to go back to your dream and then deal with the dream police. So the two different orders of reality have no connection at all. So don't worry about where the fruits of the actions go. They go in the dream.
Wonderful. And I think we've had a great and fantastic session. Thank you, Andreji. It was enlightening indeed. And if our audience would like to maybe stay in touch with you or reach out to you, connect you in some form, what is the best way to make contact?
I only have one website. It is yesvedanta.com. And there's a contact on the website there. Yes, Vedanta. So we say yes to Vedanta.
Great, wonderful. So thank you very much. And, I really appreciate you coming here. We are all very grateful for you.
Thank you.
Having taken the time out of your day. And we request the audience to stick around. We have one more session coming. It's going to be a video recording of L. Ramaswamiji. So we'll see you shortly. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste. Hari Om.
Hari Om.